Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of DEI After 5. You know, as we continue to move forward in this world, we are becoming more and more interconnected. And, you know, what we're starting to see is this shift in people moving from different countries, different places, across the globe, right? So not just coming to one country, everyone is just moving constantly. And with that, you know, as we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're really starting to see this mindset shift of how do you really value the diversity that you have? How do you really value, or what does it look like to make sure that people are not assimilating, but they are truly feeling included in the process, and you're utilizing and tapping into the skills that they bring to the table? And so today, my guest is Ukeme Awakessien Jeter, who is an author and an immigrant that talks about just kind of the grit that immigrants bring to the table. And so Ukeme, welcome to the show.
Sacha, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. Your intro music is a whole bop. I was like, let's do a little dance before this.
Yes, let's get into it. You know, so for folks who may not know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you. So like you said, I immigrated to the United States. I immigrated here for college at the age of 18. Immigration for college is the second reason most immigrants come to the United States. So I'm just a stat of immigrating here. When I immigrated here, there was no long-term plans on whether I was going to stay here after I was done with college, but that happened to be my story. So I started my career as an engineer. And after working as an engineer for almost 7 years, different set of circumstances led to me heading back to school to be on a student visa. And so I went to law school. So I like to say I'm an engineer turned lawyer. Mm-hmm. And just about 5 years ago, I entered the realm of public service. So I am also an elected official for my community, and recently just penned this book, Immigrant, which is a sum of my 25-year immigration experience in the United States.
Wow. And it's funny because I'm glad that you pointed out, you know, education being kind of that number two reason, right? That number one typically is a job, right?
Correct.
You want to come for better opportunities. And so I guess I would say I am a immigrant from that perspective. My father came to this country for a job, an opportunity. And so here I am, kind of, I don't want to say forced. That sounds horrible. But, you know, again, you do what your parents do. I was
for the opportunity.
I had no choice.
The reason for global migration, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so it's just fascinating to me because when you start to think about, you know, this country in particular, but then even more in a global context, immigration has been a constant, right? That is how most of the world has been populated, is through immigration, is through migration, is through all of these shifts being personal goals or societal issues that may arise or political issues that may arise. We're always in this constant state of flux. And so, you know, what I said at the top was, I think for a long time, the mindset, and I'll specifically speak to the United States, of, you know, you immigrate to this country and you have to assimilate. You have to blend in. You don't want to stand out. But what I have been noticing over the last several years has been the beauty of that diversity, right? The beauty of what we bring to the table that may be different. How do you celebrate those differences? How do you celebrate those unique experiences? And so, you know, talk to us about, you know, what is immigrant? What does that mean? And how does that kind of fall into how we shape, how we look at immigrants that are part of now our work system in our communities?
Yes, yeah, that's a fascinating question, and there's a lot to unpack there. We'll start with immigrant. This concept of immigrant came up for me in 2022. I was invited back to my alma mater to give the commencement speech, and of course, in a commencement speech, you're trying to connect with the audience, right? That was my years ago, and these are students that are entering the workforce, and so of course, my story is the immigrant story, and so I'm sharing my immigration story with this commencement class. And when I was done giving that speech, and part of what I said in my speech is, you've got to learn to live off script. My immigrant experience has forced this ability to have to live off script, right? You come to a new world, a new place, you lose your social networks, right? You have to be resourceful to figure out new things. And this cuts across all socioeconomic dynamics. It doesn't matter where on the socioeconomic spectrum you are, resourcefulness is still a thing. Like, if you have a lot of money in the bank, you still need to figure out what bank you're going to put it in, who you know in the bank, is your money safe? That just takes resourcefulness, and then you've got to adapt to the new environment that you're in. And so I'm telling that story to the commencement class, and when I get off the stage, quite a few international students come up to me. This one particular student comes up and says something that planted the idea for the book. And the student said to me, till your speech, I'd never really considered my immigrant experience as leadership skills, like on leadership skills. And I thought, my goodness, guess what? I didn't either till probably 10 years into my career. You know what I mean? Where I'm like, I remember a boss, I was applying for a promotion and was asked, well, do you have project management skills? And I was like, do I ever? Have you ever tried like navigating all the visa classes, keeping up your legal status? Like that is something that cuts across the immigrant experience. And so immigrant is a ubiquitous term that I came up with, but it's a combination of skills. Of course, there's shared grit in the immigrant experience, which we know from Duckworth that grit is passion and perseverance over time. But immigrants come with a little bit more than just grit. There's the adaptability, resourcefulness, like I said, perseverance, all those things, those combined things are the skill sets that immigrant is.
It's so funny to me because as you were talking, and I'm gonna try to say this in a way that I'm gonna just say it, it's after 5. I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say. I truly believe that immigrants bring more skills to the table than the average bear, right? Like I'm gonna just put it that way because of what you said, right? For so many people, and I think of folks that are bilingual, there is this misnomer that, oh, they're ignorant, they don't know anything. And I'm like, they are translating in 2 languages faster than you could think of the sentence that's coming out of your mouth next, right? Like there's a certain skill set that comes with that, being able to think and communicate in 2 different languages. And it may not be perfect, but shoot, there are a whole lot of Americans that don't speak perfectly either, and perfect English in their native tongue. So, I think of those things. I think of a conversation I even had yesterday with someone where I was just like, I don't do mediocre. And it's because of this having to do things twice as hard, and you have to work twice as hard, etc. But also I come from a culture that is 98% literate, right? So when people don't read instructions, I'm like, I don't understand, because that's just a basic common skill that you should have. And so it's just, as you're talking, I'm like, all of these things that I have a very high bar for. Yet people don't necessarily see that as leadership skills or competencies or capabilities, because they have a very narrow mindset of what leadership should and be and what it should look like.
Absolutely. And, that's why I was stunned after that student's comments, and I went poking around and found that only 3% of our Fortune 100 CEOs are immigrants.
Mhm.
And that's an alarming stat because 14% of the country is immigrants. And by immigrants, I'm using immigrants in its very traditional term. That means you are living in a country other than your country of birth, right? There's immigrant origin, which is second generation immigrants. That is a larger pool, right? That means you have one immigrant parent. That's even a larger pool. So this country that its very origins from the 1800s is the immigration story.
Mhm.
This country was really literally founded on those principles. America is the one that has done it the best, is the home for the largest global migrants. It is alarming to me the face of leadership given that we are the land of immigrants. And of
Yeah.
course, like you said, to your point, we are so accustomed to what we think a leader should look like and sound like. I mean, you can pull there's been studies on this, right? Pull a 5-year-old from the playground, give them a bunch of pictures. Chances are they will pick the white male as the leader.
Mhm.
It's just so ingrained in what we think leadership is.
Yeah. It's mind-blowing when you think about the roots, like you said, of this country built on immigrants, right? Unless you are indigenous to this land, and we know what happened to the folks that were indigenous to this land as well. You have immigrant roots,
Yes.
and say it that way. As far back as it needs to be to now, you have immigrant roots. And so what baffles me so much is how certain things have become American, like it is the American way. Well, the
Yeah.
American way is rooted in cultures outside of this country, right? This is a very fairly young country compared to the rest of the world. And so when you think about like what makes someone American, or what are they assimilating to, no one can really define that, right? Like, what is American culture? Because it feeds off of so many other cultures. And so it's interesting when we talk about leadership, and that very specific leadership, it is based in supremacy culture,
Mm.
right? So when you start to unpack that, and what does that look like, and what does that mean, and how do you challenge that? The immigrant story runs counter to that in so many ways. But I think so many people are so accustomed to this is what leadership looks like, that they don't realize that in many instances it's a failed leadership model compared to how leadership looks in other parts of the world.
Yes. And because of that, what you end up seeing, and what are the perils of, I kind of say this in the book, the perils of assimilation. We force assimilation. And there is actually magic in the assimilating. 50% of Fortune 500 companies, almost 50% of them, were founded by immigrants. I'm talking Levi's back in when gold miners were trying to figure out what to wear. German immigrant Strauss is the one that came up with Levi Strauss, because we needed this strong. And that came out of the process of being relatively new to the country, understanding fabric, and doing that. Every new innovation, WhatsApp, that is now used by a gazillion people around the world, right?
Every day. I use it every day.
Every day, founded by immigrants. And the whole principle of like, how can I message with someone a refugee that's on the boat? Literally, the founders were sitting thinking about these problems. The reason they were able to do that is, again, because they were in that process of assimilation, where they just come and they're thinking about, how do I communicate with my family across the ocean, right? So there is magic happening in that newcomer, that when we say you have to look and sound like this in order to be elevated to leadership, we force people to assimilate to a monoculture, which, to your point, what is this monoculture? This monoculture of what should be a leader is so driven by whiteness. And that's what we call the melting pot. And if I had one magic wand, I wish we got rid of the term the melting pot, because it's just inaccurate. What we want is people to still bring that magic of the newness, take on what they feel they can take on. I gave an example in my book. my parents are Nigerian, they come visit. When they come visit, they adapt by changing their clothes, right? So they'll wear jeans as opposed to their Nigerian outfits, so not to draw attention to themselves. But they're not big fans of hamburgers, so they're not going to get that, right? So the process. But if we are forcing assimilation in the workplace, they're sitting in the workplace eating burgers when that's not what they feel. That's all that you have in the lunchroom, and now they're eating burgers, right? You're forcing this as opposed to letting them take on parts of the culture that they're comfortable taking on, and still maintaining their parts of the culture that they want to. And that's the aim, right?
It's a blend.
That's business success. Businesses thrive when we have a delicate balance that does not force assimilation.
Two things immediately come to mind. One, I was chuckling about the hamburger thing because, growing up, my mother is from the Caribbean. So we had Caribbean food in our house on a regular basis. That was just normal food for us. And it wasn't until my sister and I were long gone and came back to visit. I'm like, wait a minute, when did you start making macaroni and cheese? Like, we never had that as kids. Like, what are you talking about? And people are loving your macaroni. So we felt like we were like left out of something because we were just like, okay, you become Americanized after we leave. So
assimilation eventually happens. So the beauty about assimilation is the longer you are in a place, you take it on. So, but you can't force what's going to happen in 20 years to happen in year 2. That's where we struggle in the workplace.
Yeah.
Right. So I love that. Eventually she was like, oh, let me find some mac and cheese recipe. Oh, let me try this.
Right. And then now gold stars. I'm just like, okay, whatever. But the other thing
theory, it proves the theory. It's taking on parts of the culture. Right.
It does. The other thing that you said that I think is so critical is, when I think about like psychological safety, and I think about when you get to that 4th stage of, challenger safety and wanting to challenge the status quo, it is very difficult to do, particularly if you are an immigrant, because you are seeing everyone doing that same thing. But because of your perspective, you see things in a very different way. And if you create an organization or a culture where those perspectives are valued, right? That's where innovation happens. That's where you start to come up with the WhatsApps and the Levi Strauss, because you're solving problems for audiences that are bigger than you could have ever imagined, or you don't even have insight into. And so, when we talk about creating these environments, it is how do you ensure that everyone feels valued, seen, heard, and connected? And to do that with an immigrant population that's within your workplace, it is much more than just checking the box on, oh yeah, everyone feels good. You have to truly check in, because folks may have felt like I have to assimilate in this space in order to succeed. But if you value what they're bringing to the table that is outside of the box, and you see that in a much more valuable light, that's where people are going to start to shine, right? That's when your organization is going to start to skyrocket. And I think we need to get out of this mindset of leadership looks one way, or, the phrase that makes me sick is, a culture fit.
Oh, correct.
Right? I don't necessarily want to fit into your culture, right? I want to do a good job, and I may want to add to your culture. I may want to add to what you all are doing so that you can get to the next level. And so when organizations are focused on fit versus add, and they see any idea that you have as competing with them or not falling in line, that's not an organization that's going to value what you bring to the table.
Yes. And you say that, and I think instantly of 2 instances, particularly with immigrants, and I write about this in the book, that are unique biases to immigrants. And that is the accent bias and the foreign education bias. So when we talk about fit, right, this executive presence generally is fit. We're talking about this theory that no one really understands what fit is. Is it how I'm communicating? Is it my communication style? For immigrants, this is very big, right? Because accent bias is huge. We tend to attach intelligence to how someone sounds.
Yeah.
And that is a first level problem because we tend to think the British accent is smart, but the African accent is not. And there is nothing like an African accent to start with. You got the Nigerian accent, you got the West African accent, the East African
This is a gamut, right?
Gamut of accents. And so, I tell a story of a colleague that was used to reduce resumes down to, the 3 or whatever that were going to be interviewed. She did that job, picked the 3, passed it on to recruiting, and they were the ones to call for the interviews. So they called all 3, and one of them was an immigrant with a heavy accent. So they called this colleague back and said, we've only decided to advance 2 of the 3 that you put forward because we couldn't understand the third one. And we're afraid that they're not going to be a culture fit because no one will understand them. And this is just based on screening on the phone. This is someone that scaled the resume review process, right? So their resume to resume was part of the course. But then we take people out because of how they sound.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing in the workplace. The second thing is this foreign education bias. And it's a little tongue in cheek, but listen, I started I'm a STEM kid. The law of gravity, I don't care whether you learn it in Arabic, whether you learn it in French, whether you learn it in English. The law of gravity is the same, regardless of what country. The same thing with the human body. Where the heart is in the human body is the same in every human body, right? So when you learn science in a different country, it's the same. But we tend to have all these certification processes or a view that the American education system or degrees are what we want in the workplace. And if you have this foreign degree, we don't know what to do with it. We don't value it. We don't tend to look at it on the resume and say, oh, this is a school we know, so we're going to bring them in for an interview. That, again, instantly takes immigrants out. So to your point in this culture fit, it is very, it's a very narrow scope and lacks the cultural competence and multiculturalism that we need in how we're reviewing people. And this is sad because 1 in 5 people in the workplace by 2035 is going to be an immigrant.
Yeah.
1 in 5 people. So it's like we actually have to get this right. We actually have to be able to coexist multiculturally.
There's so much where my brain is going. This, I mean, the accent bias, I think, is something that I'm very keenly aware of because my parents both had accents. My father has passed. But my father's accent was very strong. He had a very heavy Bayesian accent, Barbadian accent. And my friends would always say, like, is he speaking English? And I'm like, yeah, like he said hi. I mean, it was just, so to me, my ear is tuned to accents, and there may be some that fall a little different on my ear, but I'm keenly aware of that. And so when I hear, especially when I was working in corporate, and I would hear someone say something about someone's accent, I'm saying, what that tells me is your ear is immature. Right? Like that has nothing to do with that person. That's your ear being immature. And so you need to be able to tune in ways that you may not have had to. And then the flip side of that is Americans do it to each other as well too. She wasn't the best person to work for, but I used to work for somebody that was from West Virginia and had the twangiest country accent that you would ever hear. But she was a very smart woman.
Yes.
And she would often talk about how she had to prove herself because as soon as she opened her mouth, people would dismiss her because of that country twang that came out. Yes. Right. And again, you think about it, Southern states, for some reason, people feel are more ignorant than Northern states.
Yeah.
Different parts of the country. So we do it within the United States as well. Yeah. Add another country accent on top of that. Right. Our ears are very immature.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I often challenge people on. And the education piece, when you look at, and I've had to say this in spaces too, when you look at the American education system from a global context, it ain't at the top.
Correct. Correct.
So, those are the things that
no one likes to hear it, though. No one likes to hear it. But it's like,
right.
Yes, I mean, we do research good. Like we have some STEM programs that, we have NIH and some federal grants that will dump great money into science, but that is not for everything, right?
No.
And we have a hard time accepting that.
Yeah. And so it's getting out of that cultural bias that so many people have, especially as you said, not too long from now, 1 in 5 are going to be an immigrant to this country.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then just this aside anecdote is clearly American accent.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a room or in a space where I've heard people talk about immigrants in such a horrible, nasty way. Yeah. And I'm just like, I got a green card.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's just like the cognitive dissonance that starts to occur because they hear me and they're just like, but wait, what, huh?
Yeah.
You never know who's in the room.
Absolutely.
You never know someone's experience or how they got to where you are. I often say, just because we're in the same place don't mean we got there the same way.
Whew.
So, so I want to do a little bit of a pivot.
Yes.
How, oh goodness, I had another question that popped into my mind and I'm like, we're going for another 30 minutes on that one. What are some things that organizations can do to start to break out of that bias? Like, be it audio, be it just mindsets on education, be it just understanding skill sets that immigrants have. What are some things that organizations can start to do now?
Yeah. 2 things. First, and this is probably the lowest barrier, easy to do, is kind of learn how to have curious conversations. What I mean by that is we're such an assumption-based society. Media, news, all of that, you attach instant assumptions to where people are from, what they should do, what they should know, all of those kind of things. And so curious conversations is a way of learning to ask how and not why. We're so used to asking, well, why is that? And why comes with judgment.
Yes.
Well, why do you believe that?
Yeah.
As opposed to, how did you come to believe that? See how that lands differently? It invites the other person to explain themselves without judgment. And so there are tools that I talk about. I give some tools on how to have curious conversations. NICE is being an acronym, and then probe, right? Your conversations have to probe, but they have to be nice and respectful if you're really going to get anywhere. That is one way. The leaders, right? I think it starts with leaders. You start to have that. You model and exemplify how the rest of your organization can have these curious conversations.
Yeah.
The second thing, and this involves more investment by organizations, is cultural intelligence, right? We have done so well at learning our emotional intelligence. Not too long ago, 10 years ago, EQ was such a big thing for our leaders to get tested on and learn and develop and those kind of things. You're naturally born with your IQ. And again, 20 years ago, we used to hire people for their IQ and how smart they are. And that's what got you in the door. And then we pivoted to EQ. Well, it's time to add another thing to that. And that's your CQ, which is your cultural intelligence. And listen, cultural intelligence, people are like, well, is that learning how to say hello in like 5 languages and learning? And I'm like, no, that's not what cultural intelligence is. Cultural intelligence is really about self-awareness and how to have that how to work within multicultural teams, how to build multicultural teams. I often say, because some organizations are like, well, this taps me out. I'm only a national organization. My stuff is just here within the US. And I say, that's fine, but your customer base has changed. And the people that are buying your stuff is different. So you need cultural intelligence for your customer base. How you sell to that customer base requires cultural intelligence. You got to be culturally sensitive. The ads that used to work before to get people to buy your things are not going to work anymore, right? So we've seen some of those falters, right, with how these ads are just culturally insensitive. So it's learning about this cultural spectrum on who your clients are, who your customers are, and how to speak to them. That's what cultural intelligence is. So these two things, curious conversations, cultural intelligence, are kind of like the immediate things organizations can start to do to I like to say harness immigrant.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. How do you fill your cup? What are the things you do to take care of yourself?
Well, that's been hard these last 2 years because I've been writing. But I'm a runner. I ran in college. I'm nowhere as fast as I used to be, but I still love to get out there, get a run in. Anytime I can take 30 minutes in nature every day to run is a beautiful thing. And I like to. I call it Passion Plan. It's actually a planner that's called a Passion Plan. It's a mix of planning and dreaming and daydreaming. I was a big growing up in, putting your dreams out there, but also reflecting at the same time. So the Passion Plan allows me to do that, where I dream big, but I also reflect on how I'm doing and how I'm getting there. So those two things fill me.
I love it. So how can folks get in touch with you if they wanted to learn more about your book, learn more about you and the work you do?
Oh, thanks for asking that. So I actually, as part of the book, I said, listen, I don't know how many people who read books these days. The world has become so busy. So I just kind of created this roadmap. It's a free roadmap that people can download on my website, www.immigrantbook.com. And it helps organizations build effective leadership pipelines. It's a 4-step guide for that roadmap. So that's on my website. But I'm active on LinkedIn. I'd love to engage on LinkedIn. It's my platform of choice. You can find me Ukeme on LinkedIn. And then if I'm not writing some thought leadership piece on LinkedIn, then I am looking at dog pictures and scrolling and posting on Instagram. And I'm also Ukeme on Instagram.
Wonderful. I love it. I love it. It's so funny because as you said that, a little squirrel just popped up on my screen over here. And I'm just like, oh, you're kind of cute.
I know, right?
Little animal. So, Ukeme, thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's one that's been glossed over for several years. Like, we really need to understand we can't roll this back, right? Our demographics are changing and will constantly be changing. And so we need to be able to have the wherewithal to do the things that we need to do to prepare workplaces for immigrants, but then also empower immigrants to feel like, no, you don't always have to assimilate, right? You bring your own magic to the table. And so I appreciate you sharing with us and talking about that grit that so many of us aim to have and actually do have. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Sacha, thank you so much. And love that you're having the conversation, open to the conversation. I think our DEI space, is evolving, right? I was talking to my dad not too long ago, and he's like, I remember when DEI was just gender. We were just dealing with, do we have enough women in leadership? And, so we're, again, that evolution. Now the next frontier is, let's really look at this immigrant population. So I think that's the next frontier for DEI work. So thanks for having the conversation.
Absolutely. So funny. I did a workout class this morning and she does a meditate, a quote. And today's quote was, we're always evolving. So that just brought it full circle.
Let's roll on that. Let's roll out on that.
That is the theme for today. So thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. I hope you were able to walk away with a few nuggets that you were able to take with you, take to your organization, have conversation with your friends, especially those that might have immigrant backgrounds, because now is the time to really start digging in and looking into that magic. So I want you to be able to like, share, subscribe to this week's episode and every episode of DEI After 5. You can find us here every Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern. And until next time, have a good one.